When this upper outline is accomplished, the log may be turned bottom side up, and the sides of the extremities rounded off. This may be done with an axe and adze, and when performed, the bottom curves should be made by chopping away the wood in the curves shown in the lower outline of our illustration. This curve should also be marked out with chalk, and should commence a little nearer the end of the log than the curve on the upper side. Shave off the wood to a blunt edge on this curve, at both bow and stern. The rough form of the canoe is now obtained, and by the aid of the draw knife, or shaving knife, it can be neatly and smoothly finished. It is then ready to be dug out. The tools most useful for this purpose are the adze and axe, and sometimes the sledge and chisel. The digging out is of course the most tedious part, but with sharp tools it is a comparatively easy matter. When the great bulk of the wood is taken out, the interior should be finished with a howell or round adze, and the sides may be worked to 1.5 inches in thickness if desired. The writer once saw one of these canoes of most exquisite workmanship, being only 1 inch in thickness, and so light as to be easily lifted with one hand. Of course, such perfection as this is not necessary for ordinary purposes, although where the canoe is expected to be carried any great distance, it is well to thin it as much as possible. A gimlet or small auger may be used to gauge the thickness of the canoe, using it in the following manner. Supposing the required thickness of the wood is 2 inches, proceed to bore the hole from the inside of the canoe, and continue until the point of the gimlet or auger barely makes its appearance on the outside. Draw out the tool, and if the thickness measures more than is required, insert into the hole a slender piece of wood exactly 2 inches in length. Push it in as far as it will go, and you may safely work until you reach the end of it. By this method the thickness may be gauged in different parts of the boat sufficiently to acquire a fair average thickness, and there is no danger of cutting through. The gimlet should be allowed to extend outside of the canoe only sufficiently to be detected, and the holes thus made will seldom give any trouble as leaks. If, however, this should be the case, a little putty or pitch will remedy the difficulty. The dugout may be constructed of any size, and of any desired shape, but the above is the usual type. When leaks or cracks occur, they may be caulked with hemp, and smeared with pitch, which will render them thoroughly waterproof. For lightness and portability there is no boat more desirable or more unique than the Indian or birch bark canoe. Where the white birch grows in perfection, and the trees attain a large size, the chief material of the birch bark canoe is at hand, and although we ordinary mortals could not be expected to attain to that perfection of skill which the Indians exhibit in the manufacture of these canoes, we nevertheless can succeed sufficiently well to answer all practical purposes. The Indian canoes are often perfect marvels of skill and combined strength and lightness. These half-civilized beings seem to take as naturally to the making of these commodities, as if it were almost an hereditary habit with them, and few men, even with the most exhaustive practice, can compete with the Indian in the combined result of strength, lightness, durability, external beauty, and nicety of work, which are the united characteristics of the typical bark canoe. The average length of the bark as used by trappers is about 12 feet, but they may be constructed of any desired dimensions, to the length of 40 feet. A canoe of this size will carry 15 or 20 persons, and may be transported with ease upon the shoulders of 2 strong men. The smaller size, above mentioned, is capable of carrying 2 persons, and is a light load for a single man. In constructing the bark canoe, the first requisite is the gunwale, or upper framework. This should consist of 4 strips of cedar, ash, or other light, strong wood, 2 for each side of the boat. For an ordinary-sized canoe, their length should be about 12 feet, width 1 inch, and thickness 1/4 of an inch. They should be tied together in pairs at the ends, and the 2 pairs then joined at the same place. The object of these pieces is to give strength and form to the canoe, and to offer a firm security for the edges of the bark, which are secured between them. The gunwale being prepared, we are now ready for the birch bark. The bottom of a well-made canoe should be in one large piece, as our illustration indicates, if possible. Select some large tree with the trunk free from knots or excrescences. Mark off as great a length as possible, and chop a straight cut in the bark through the whole length of the piece, after which it should be carefully peeled from the wood. It will sometimes happen, where large birches exist in perfection, that a single piece may be found of sufficient size for a whole canoe, but this is rather exceptional, and the bottom is generally pieced out, as seen in our drawing. This piecing may be accomplished with an awl and Indian twine, or by the aid of a large needle threaded with the same, sewing with an over and over stitch around the edge of each piece. Use as large pieces as are attainable, and continue to sew them on until the area of bark measures about 4.5 feet in width by 12 feet in length, the dark-colored sides of the bark all facing the same way. Next, select a flat piece of ground, and mark off a distance of 10 feet, or 2 feet less than the length of the gunwales. At each end of the space 2 tall stakes should be driven into the ground about 3 inches apart. Now turn the bark on the ground with its white side uppermost, and fold it loosely and evenly through the long center. In this folded condition it should now be lifted by the upper edge and set between the stakes. There will then be about a foot of projecting bark beyond each pair of stakes. These ends should now be covered by folding another piece of bark over them, sewing the edges firmly to the sides of the rude form of the canoe, which now presents itself. When this is done, each end should be supported on a log or stone. This will cause the bottom line to sink downwards at about the proper curve. We are now ready for the gunwale. Lay it in the proper position, fitting the edges of the bark between the 2 strips on each side, and sewing around the whole with a winding stitch, exactly after the manner of the edge of an ordinary palm leaf fan. The inside of the canoe should now be lined with long strips of cedar running through the entire length of the boat if possible, but if not, should be so cut as to neatly overlap at the ends. These pieces should be 1 inch or 2 in width, and from 1/4 to 1/2 an inch in thickness. The ribs are then to be put in. These are generally made from ash, 1 or 2 inches in width, and figure 136 1/4 of an inch in thickness. Any light flexible wood will answer the purpose, and even barrel hoops when attainable will do very well. These ribs should be bent to fit the interior of the canoe crosswise, either close together, or with equal distances between them, and the ends should then be firmly secured beneath the gunwales by a continuous loop stitched through the bark. For a canoe of 12 feet in length, the width should be about 2 feet, and in order to keep the gunwales firm, 2 or more cross pieces should be inserted, and lashed firmly at their ends as our illustration shows. The center third of the length of the canoe should be parallel at the sides, and if 2 braces, 2 feet in length, are placed at each end of this third, the shape will be about perfect. We now have a bark canoe of considerable strength and durability, and it only awaits to be made waterproof for final use. In order to accomplish this, all the seams outside, and the entire interior of the canoe should be smeared with pitch, after which its floating qualities may be tested with confidence. Should any leaks occur, their whereabouts are easily detected, and an additional application of pitch will remedy the difficulty. The Indians in sewing their bark canoes use tamarack roots, fibrous plants, and grasses, in lieu of thread, and even with these inferior materials often attain to such perfection in compact sewing, as to render the use of pitch unnecessary for waterproof purposes. Such skill is rarely attained by the white man, and the art of making a waterproof canoe, even out of a single piece of bark, is by no means an easy task without the aid of tar or pitch. For the trapper we strongly recommend the birch bark. With the above directions we are sure no one could go astray, and we are equally sure that a canoe made as we describe would present advantages of lightness and portability which no other style of boat would possess. For temporary purposes, canoes can be made from basswood, hemlock, or spruce bark, but they are at best very rude and clumsy in comparison with the birch bark. They are generally made after the principles of the above described, either sewing or nailing the edges of the bark together, and smearing every joint and seam profusely with pitch, and adding gunwales, lining, and ribs. A light homemade boat. The following gives an easy method of making a light and serviceable bateau, which any boy, with moderate ingenuity or skill, could easily construct. Select 2 boards, about 3/4 of an inch in thickness, 18 or 20 inches in width, and 12 feet in length, which we will consider the required length of the boat. These boards should be well seasoned, and free from knots, and at least one of the sides should be straight. Next, with the aid of a draw shave, proceed to shape the ends of one of the boards, as seen on our diagram, E, representing the forward, G, the stern. The curve of the bow should commence at about 4 feet from the end, and take a rounded slope upward, leaving about 10 inches of width at the end of the board, E. The stern should be cut at the angle shown at G, commencing at about 2.5 feet from the extremity of the board and continuing upward to about 10 inches from the upper edge. The board thus shaped should now be laid evenly on the other, and the outline of the cut portions carefully scratched upon it, after which the second board should be cut in a similar manner as the first, so as to form an exact duplicate. This being accomplished, the two should be laid evenly, one over the other, and the exact center of their long edges ascertained. Marking off about 5 inches on each side of this center on both boards. Next, procure another board about 10 inches in width, 3 feet in length, and perfectly squared at the ends. Nail each end of this piece securely and squarely in the space marked on each of the long boards. Then turn the pieces carefully over and nail another board across the bottom, directly opposite the first. Figure 137. We will now leave them and give our attention to the bow piece, which is the next requisite. This is shown at A, and consists of a solid piece of oak, or other hard wood, well seasoned, and hewn out in the arrow shape, indicated in our illustration. It should first be cut 3-cornered, the inside face being about 8 inches, and the other two 10 inches. Its length should be about 11 inches, and its underside should be sloped off on a line with the undercurve of the bows. At about 5 inches from the inner face, and on each side, a piece should be sawn out, 1 inch in thickness, thus leaving on each side a notch which will exactly receive the sideboards of the boat, as seen at A. The piece being thus ready, the bow ends of the boards should be drawn together, fitted in the notches and securely spiked with large nails. A bow piece of this kind adds greatly to the strength of a boat, and will stand much rough usage. The board for the stem should next be prepared. This should be 10 inches in width and 2 feet in length, and should be securely nailed between the ends of the boards at the stem, as shown at G, being afterwards overlapped on the top by a board of similar size, as our illustration shows, at C. The bottom of the boat is now easily made by nailing boards crosswise, sawing off the projecting ends close to the curve of the sideboards. After the pieces are all nailed in place, the seams and crevices should be caulked with hemp, using a blunt chisel, or hard wooden wedge, and a mallet. The seats should now be put in, as these are not only a matter of comfort, but of necessity, acting as braces to the sides of the boat. They should be 2 in number, one being placed 3 feet from the stern and the other 1 foot beyond the brace board originally nailed across the top of the boat. The seats should be cut at the ends in a curve corresponding to the part of the boat in which they are placed, and should be situated about a foot from the bottom of the boat, their ends resting on short boards beneath them against the sides of the boat. These are indicated by the dotted lines, HH, in the diagram. When thus resting, they should be securely fastened in place by strong figure 138 screws, driven through the sides of the boat into their ends, FF, allowing someone to sit on the seat meanwhile to keep it in place. Small cleats should now be tacked to the bottom of the boat, beneath the seat and underneath the seat itself, in order to keep the props in place, after which the original brace board across the top of the boat may be knocked off and the bateau is complete and ready for service. A boat thus made is quite comely in shape, and may be painted to suit the fancy. Should a rudder be required, the broad board at the stern offers a good place of attachment, and oarlocks may be adjusted at the proper places. These may consist of a pair of cleats attached to the inside of the boat, as seen in the illustration. In case it may be found difficult to obtain the large single boards for the sides of the boat, 2 or more narrow ones will answer the purpose, although not as perfectly. In this case they should first be firmly attached together by cleats, securely screwed to the inside. When first put on the water the boat will probably leak in places, but if left to soak for a few hours the wood will generally swell sufficiently to completely close the crevices. If, however, the leak should continue, that particular part of the boat should be recorked and smeared with pitch. This latter substance is of great value to the trapper, not only in boat building but in the construction of his shanties and in other various ways. It will most effectually stop almost any leak in a canoe or boat, and of course should always be applied hot. The scow. The bateau we have above described is built so as to allow for considerable speed in the water, either in rowing or sculling, but where this speed is not especially desired the pointed bows may be dispensed with, and the sides of the boat made perfectly straight. In this case the bottom takes equal slopes at the ends, and both bow and stern are of the same width, and an ordinary flat-bottomed boat with parallel sides is the result. In many cases a scow of this kind answers every purpose, and is certainly much more easily made. We have thus described a few of the most common instances of boats used by trappers, and with our full description and illustrations no one can go astray. A boat of some kind is almost an indispensable requisite to the trapper, and any one of the foregoing will be found sufficient for all ordinary purposes. A paddle may be used, and in shallow or muddy water a pusher or mudstick will be found useful. This should consist of a pole 7 or 8 feet in length, supplied at the ends with an attachment of the shape of the letter U. This may be constructed in 2 pieces, firmly screwed to opposite sides of the end of the pole, and so formed as to present a curved crotch. Such a stick will be found very useful for pushing through weeds and muddy places. A simple pole trimmed so as to leave a crotch at the end will also answer the purpose very well. Snowshoes. These commodities are almost indispensable to the trapper where he pursues his vocation in the winter time, during the prevalence of deep snows. When properly made they permit the wearer to walk over the surface of the snow with perfect ease, where, without them, travel would be extremely difficult if not impossible. In the regions of perpetual snow, and also in Canada and neighboring districts, snowshoes are very commonly worn. In the latter localities the snowshoe race forms one of the favorite sports of the season, and young and old alike join in its mysteries. Like riding on the velocipede, walking on snowshoes looks easy enough, but we notice that a few somersaults are usually a convincing argument that the art is not as simple as it appears. The first experience on snowshoes is apt to be at least undignifying, if not discouraging, and in order to get used to the strange capers and eccentricities of an ordinarily well-behaved snowshoe, it requires considerable patience and practice. There is no telling where, in an unguarded moment, they will land you, and they seem to take especial delight in stepping on each other and turning their wearer upside down. The principal secret of success, and one may as well know it at the start, as to learn it at the expense of a pint of snow down his back, consists in taking steps sufficiently long to bring the widest portion of the stepping shoe beyond that of the other, keeping the feet rather far apart and stepping pretty high. By observing these precautions, and trusting in Providence, much embarrassment may be saved, and an hour's effort will thoroughly tame the unruly appendages, which at best do not permit of much grace or elegance of gait. To the moose hunter snowshoes are often an absolute necessity, and trapping in many cases would be impossible without them. They are thus brought fully within the scope of our volume, and we give a few simple directions for their manufacture. Our illustration gives the correct shape of the shoe. The framework should consist of a strip of ash, hickory or some other elastic wood, bent into the form indicated and wound around the ends with twine or strips of hide. The length of the piece should be about 6 feet, more or less, in proportion to the size of the individual who proposes to wear the shoe. If the bending should prove difficult, it may be rendered an easy matter by the application of boiling water. Across the front part 2 strips of stout leather, or other tough hide, are then fastened, and these further secured together by 3 or 4 bands on each side of the middle, as our drawing shows. In the original Indian snowshoe, from which our drawing was made, the network was constructed from strips of moose hide, which were interlaced much after the manner of an ordinary cane-seated chair. Strips of leather, deer skin, or even split cane, above alluded to, may also be used, and the lacing may be either as our illustration represents, or in the simple rectangular woof seen in ordinary cloth. In order to attach the interlacing to the bow, the latter should be wound with wide strips of cane, if it can be procured, or otherwise with strips of tough skin. The loops thus formed offer a continuous security, and the whole interior, with the exception of the space at the front between the cross pieces, should be neatly filled with the next work. It is well to run the first lines across the shoe, from side to side, passing through the windings of the bow. Across them, in the form of the letter X, the 2 other figure 139 cords should be interlaced, after the manner shown in the cut. This forms a secure and not very complicated network, and is the style usually adopted by the Indian makers. There is another mode of attaching the lacework to the bow which is also commonly employed, and consists in a series of holes bored at regular intervals through the wood. The winding is thus dispensed with, but the bow is sometimes weakened by the operation, and we are inclined to recommend the former method in preference. In attaching the shoe, the ball of the foot should be set on the second cross piece, and there secured by a strip of hide, which should be first adjusted as seen in the engraving, being afterward tied over the foot and then behind the ankle. Snowshoes are made in other ways, but we believe that the typical Indian snowshoe above described is the best. The toboggan or Indian sledge. For winter traffic over deep snows there is no better sled in the world than the Indian toboggan. To the trapper during a winter campaign it is often an indispensable convenience, and without it the Indian hunters of the north would find great difficulty in getting their furs to market. All through the winter season the various trading posts of Canada are constantly visited by numbers of Indian trappers, many of whom have traveled hundreds of miles on their snowshoes with their heavily laden toboggans. Arrived at their market they sell or trade their stock of furs, and likewise dispose of their toboggans, reserving only their snowshoes to aid them in their long tramp homewards. In Canada and northward the toboggan is in very extensive use, both for purposes of traffic and amusement. It is quite commonly met with in the streets of various Canadian cities, and is especially appreciated by the youthful population, who are fond of coasting over the crust of snow. For this purpose there is no other sled like it, and a toboggan of the size we shall describe will easily figure 140 accommodate 2 or 3 boys, and will glide over a crust of snow with great ease and rapidity. To the trapper it is especially valuable for all purposes of transportation. The flat bottom rests upon the surface of the snow, and the weight being thus distributed, a load of 200 or 300 pounds will often make but little impression and can be drawn with marvelous ease. Our illustration gives a very clear idea of the sled, and it can be made in the following way. The first requisite is a board about 8 feet in length and 16 or more inches in width. Such a board may be procured at any sawmill. Oak is the best wood for the purpose, although hickory, basswood or ash will do excellently. It should be planed or sawed to a thickness of about 1/3 of an inch, and should be free from knots. If a single board of the required width is not easily found, 2 boards may be used, and secured side by 3 cleats, one at each end and the other in the middle, using wrought nails and clinching them deeply into the board on the underside. The single board is much to be preferred, if it can be had. The next requisites are 7 or 8 wooden cross pieces of a length equivalent to the width of the board. 4 old broomsticks, cut in the required lengths, will answer this purpose perfectly, and if these are not at hand other sticks of similar dimensions should be used. 2 side pieces are next needed. These should be about 5 feet in length, and in thickness exactly similar to the cross pieces. Next procure a few pairs of leather shoestrings or some strips of tough calf skin. With these in readiness we may now commence the work of putting the parts together. Begin by laying the cross pieces at equal distances along the board. Across these and near their ends lay the 2 side pieces, as seen in the illustration. By the aid of a gimlet or awl, 4 holes should now be made through the board, beneath the end of each cross piece, and also directly under the side piece. It is well to mark with a pencil the various points for the holes, after which the sticks can be removed and the work much more easily performed. The 4 holes should be about an inch apart, or so disposed as to mark the 4 corners of a square inch. It is also necessary to make other holes along the length of the cross pieces, as seen in the illustration. The line on these can also be marked with the pencil across the board, and the holes made afterwards. These should also be an inch apart, and only 2 in number at each point, 1 on each side of the stick. When all the holes are made the board should be turned over, in order to complete preparations on the other side. The object of these various holes is for the passage of the leather shoestrings for the purpose of securing the cross pieces firmly to the board. In order to prevent these loops from wearing off on the underside, small grooves should next be made connecting the holes beneath, thus allowing the leather string to sink into the wood, where it is securely protected from injury. A narrow chisel is the best tool for this purpose, the making of the grooves being much more easily and perfectly accomplished with this than with the jackknife. When the underside is thus finished, the board may be turned over and the cross pieces and sides again arranged in place as already described. Secure the pieces to the board by the leather strings through the various holes, always knotting on the upper surface, and taking care that the knots are firmly tied. The ends of all the cross pieces will require a double cross stitch through the 4 holes beneath, in order to secure the side pieces as well. This is plainly shown in the small diagram, A. The front end of each side piece underneath should now be sharpened to a point, to allow for the bend at the front of the toboggan. The cross piece at this end should be secured to the underside of the board, so that as it bends over it will appear on the upper edge, as our illustration shows. The board should next be bent with a graceful curve, and thus held in position by a rope or strip of leather at each extremity of the end cross piece and attached to the ends of the third cross piece, as seen in the engraving. If the bending is difficult and there is danger of breaking the board, the application of boiling water will render it pliable. The drawstrings should then be attached to the ends of the second cross piece, and our toboggan is now complete. It may now be laden with 200 or 300 pounds of merchandise and will be found to draw over the surface of the snow with perfect ease. For coasting over the crust there is nothing like it. Such a toboggan as we have described will easily accommodate 3 boys, the one at the stern being provided with a sharp stick for steering, and the front occupant holding firmly to the drawstrings. The toboggan is easily made, and will do good service either for traffic or sport. Curing skins. This department of the trapper's art is one of the most important and necessary, as affecting pecuniary profits. The value of a skin in the fur market depends entirely upon the care with which it is taken from the animal and afterward prepared, and without a knowledge on this subject the young trapper will in vain seek for high prices for his furs. Large quantities of valuable skins are sent to our markets annually by inexperienced amateur trappers, and in many cases rare and beautiful furs have been almost spoiled by want of care in skinning and curing. The rules are simple and easily followed, a little care being all that is necessary to ensure most perfect success. In every case the skin should be removed shortly after death, or at least before it has become tainted with decay. Great pains should be taken in skinning. Avoid the adherence of flesh or fat to the skin, and guard against cutting through the hide, as a pierced skin is much injured in value. The parts about the eyes, legs and ears should be carefully removed. The various methods of skinning are described in our section on trapping, and in all cases the furs should be allowed to dry in a cool, airy place, free from the rays of the sun or the heat of a fire, and protected from rain. Astringent preparations of various kinds are used by many trappers, but they are by no means necessary. The most common dressing consists of equal parts of rock salt and alum dissolved in water. Into this a sufficient amount of coarse flour or wheat bran is stirred to give the mixture the consistency of batter, after which it is spread thickly over the skin and allowed to dry. It is afterwards scraped off, and in some cases a second application is made. This preparation is much used in dressing beaver, otter, mink and muskrat skins, but as many of our most successful and experienced trappers do without it, we fail to see the advantage of using it, as it is only an extra trouble. The simplest and surest way is to stretch the skin and to submit it to a gradual process of natural drying without any artificial heat or application of astringents to hasten the result. A very common mode of stretching skins consists in tacking them to a board, with the fur inwards, and allowing them to dry as already described. This method does very well for small skins, but for general purposes the stretchers are the only means by which a pelt may be properly cured and prepared. Stretchers. The board stretcher is the simplest form and is in most common use among trappers for the smaller animals. These stretchers are of two kinds, the plain and the wedged. The plain stretcher consists of a piece of board 1/4 of an inch in thickness, about 18 inches long and 6 inches in width. One end of this board is rounded figure 141 off, as seen in our illustration, and the sides should also be whittled and smoothed to a blunt edge. The board stretchers are used only for those skins which are taken off whole, that is, as described in the chapter on the otter. The skin should be drawn tightly over the blunt end of the board, and its edges either caught in notches cut in the edges of the square end or secured by a few tacks. This stretcher is particularly adapted to the skins of muskrats, minks and animals of a like size. They are known in New England as shingle stretchers and are much to be recommended on account of their lightness and the ease with which they can be made and carried. The wedge stretcher is rather more elaborate than the foregoing, and is said to be an improvement. The first requisite is a board of about 3/8 of an inch in figure 142 thickness, 2 feet or more in length, and 3½ inches at one end tapering to the width of 2 inches at the other. This end should now be rounded, and the edges of the board whittled off to a blunt edge, as already described in the foregoing, commencing near the center of the board, and thinning to the edge, and finishing with the notches at the square end. Now, by the aid of a rip saw, sever the board through the middle lengthwise. The wedge is the next thing to be constructed, and should consist of a piece of wood the thickness of the center of the board and of the same length, tapering from an inch in width at one end to ½ an inch at the other. To use the stretcher, the two boards are inserted into the skin, the latter with the fur side inward. The wedge is then inserted between the large ends of the boards and driven in sufficiently to stretch the pelt to its full capacity, securing it in the notches by slight cuts in the hide, or by a tack or two at the edge. It should then be hung in a cool, airy place, and the pelt left to season. The bow stretcher is another contrivance very commonly used for small skins like the foregoing. When this is used, the pelt should be skinned as described on page 185, the initial cut commencing at the lower jaw and extending down between the forelegs, all the feet being previously cut off. The bow may consist of a switch of any elastic wood such as hickory ironwood, elm or birch. It should be about 3 or more feet in length, and as large as a man's thumb at the butt end. By bending it in the shape of the letter U, it may easily be inserted in the skin, the latter being fastened by catching the lip on each side into a sliver notch cut on each end of the bow, as our illustration indicates. Figure 143. For large animals, such as the deer, bear, beaver, the hoop stretcher is generally employed. The hoop stretcher. This consists of a hoop made from one or more flexible switches tied together so as to form a circle. In order to be adapted to this mode of stretching, the skin should be flat, i.e. taken off as described on page 172, the initial cut extending from the lower jaw to the vent. The size of the hoop required depends upon the dimensions of the skin. Lay the latter upon some flat surface and so gauge the hoop as that it shall surround the pelt on all sides, after which the latter should be secured or laced to the hoop with twine at the edges. All loose parts should be drawn up, and the skin should everywhere be stretched like a drum head. When this is accomplished, it is the custom with many trappers to apply the preparation described on page 273, particularly where the skin is thick and fatty. But we are rather disposed to discourage the use of any preparation whatever, in any case, as they are by no means necessary. In using the board stretchers, the fur should always be on the inside, and when the hoop or bow is used it should be placed in such a position that the air may circulate freely on both sides of the skin, which should not be removed until thoroughly dry. Tanning skins. In case some of our readers might desire to tan fur skins for their own domestic purposes, the subjoined directions will be found to be reliable, and for all ordinary requirements, sufficiently adequate. For tanning with the hair on, the skin should first be cleaned, every particle of loose fat or flesh being removed, and the useless parts cut away. When this is done, it should be soaked for an hour or two in warm water. The following mixture should then be prepared. Take equal parts of borax, saltpeter, and sulfate of soda, and with them mix water sufficient to produce the consistency of thin batter. This preparation should be painted thickly on the flesh side of the skin, after which these sides should be doubled together and the pelt left in an airy place. A second mixture should next be prepared. This should consist of 2 parts sal soda, 3 parts borax, 4 parts castile or other hard soap, all to be melted together over a slow fire. At the end of 24 hours, after the application of the first mixture, the second should be applied in a similar manner, and the fur again folded and left for the same length of time. Next, make a mixture equal parts of salt and alum, dissolved in warm water and thickened with coarse flour to the consistency of thin paste. Spread this thickly over the skin and allow it to dry, after which it should be scraped off with the bowl of a spoon. The skin should be tightly stretched during the operation, in order to prevent too great shrinkage. A single application of the last named dressing, is generally sufficient for small skins, but a second or third treatment may be resorted to if required, to make the skin soft and pliable, after which it should be finished off with sandpaper and pumice stone. A skin may be thus dressed as soft as velvet, and the alum and salt will set the hair securely. The above directions are excellent for all general purposes, but we subjoin, in addition, a few other valuable hints and specific recipes in common use. Every trapper has his own peculiar hobby in regard to his tanning process, and the recipes are various and extensive. The above is one of the most reliable for general use. A common mode of tanning mink and muskrat skins is given in the following: to tan mink and muskrat skins. Before tanning, the skin should always be thoroughly cleansed in warm water, and all fat and superfluous flesh removed. It should then be immersed in a solution made of the following ingredients: 5 gallons of cold soft water, 5 quarts wheat bran, 1 gill of salt, and 1 ounce of sulfuric acid. Allow the skins to soak in the liquid for 4 or 5 hours. If the hides have been previously salted, the salt should be excluded from the mixed solution. The skins are now ready for the tanning liquor, which is made in the following way: into 5 gallons of warm, soft water, stir 1 peck of wheat bran and allow the mixture to stand in a warm room until fermentation takes place. Then add 3 pints of salt, and stir until it is thoroughly dissolved. A pint of sulfuric acid should then be poured in gradually, after which the liquor is ready. Immerse the skins and allow them to soak for 3 or 4 hours. The process of fleshing is then to be resorted to. This consists in laying the skin, fur side down, over some smooth beam, and working over the flesh side with a blunt fleshing tool. An old chopping knife, or tin candlestick, forms an excellent substitute for the ordinary fleshing knife, and the process of rubbing should be continued until the skin becomes dry, after which it will be found to be soft and pliable. The skin of the muskrat is quite tender, and the fleshing should be carefully performed. How to tan the skins of beaver, otter, raccoon, and marten. These should be stretched on a board and smeared with a mixture composed of 3 ounces each, of salt and alum, 3 gills of water, and 1 drachm of sulfuric acid. This should be thickened with wheat bran or flour, and should be allowed to dry on the skin, after which it should be scraped off with a spoon. Next, take the skin from the board, roll it with the fur inside, and draw it quickly backward and forward, over a smooth peg, or through an iron ring. The skin should then be unfolded and rolled again the opposite way, and the operation repeated until the pelt is quite soft and flexible. This is a good way of softening all kinds of skins, and the above preparation will be found excellent for all ordinary purposes. The muskrat skin may be treated in the same manner as the above, if desired, and the process directed on the muskrat skin may also be applied to the pelts of the other animals. To remove the fur for a simple tanned skin, the hide should be immersed in a liquid composed of soft water, 5 gallons, slaked lime, 4 quarts, and wood ashes, 4 quarts. Allow the skin to soak for a couple of days, after which the fur will readily slip off. Another method: take equal parts wood ashes and slaked lime, and add water to the consistency of batter. Spread this over the inside of the skin, roll it up, and place it in a pail, covering it with water. Here let it remain from 1 to 5 days, or until the hair will shed easily, after which it should be finished with the fleshing knife and velveted with sandpaper. Observations on the history of furs and the fur trade. In all cold climates, man has availed himself liberally of the warm covering with which nature has clothed the animals around him, but the wealth of the most favored nations has drawn to them the most beautiful furs, in whatever part of the world they are procured. Skins of animals were among the first materials used for clothing. Before Adam and Eve were driven from the Garden of Eden, they were furnished with coats of skins. The ancient Assyrians used the soft skins of animals to cover the couches or the ground in their tents, and the Israelites employed badgers' skins and rams' skins as ornamental hangings for the tabernacle. The ancient heroes of the Greeks and Romans are represented as being clothed in skins. Aeneas, wearing for an outer garment that of the lion, and Alcestis being formidably clad in that of the Libyan bear. Herodotus speaks of those living near the Caspian Sea wearing seal skins, and Caesar mentions that the skin of the reindeer formed in part the clothing of the Germans. In the early period, furs appear to have constituted the entire riches of the northern countries, and they were almost the only exports. Taxes were paid on them, and they were the medium of exchange. So it was also in our own Western territories in the latter part of the last century, and is to the present day, to a great extent, among the Indians. In the 11th century, furs had become fashionable throughout Europe, and the art of dyeing them was practiced in the 12th. In the history of the Crusades, frequent mention is made of the magnificent displays by the European princes, of their dresses of costly furs, before the court at Constantinople. But Richard I of England, and Philip II of France, in order to check the growing extravagance in their use, resolved that the choice of furs, ermine and sable amongst the number, should be omitted from their kingly wardrobes. Louis IX followed their example in the next century, but not until his extravagance had grown to such a pitch that 746 ermines were required for the lining of one of his surcoats. In the Times, the use of the choice of furs, as those of the sable, ermine, gris, and Hungarian squirrel, was restricted to the royal families and the nobility, to whom they served as distinctive marks and badges of rank. These privileged persons applied them lavishly to their own use, and the fashion extended to the princes of other less civilized nations. Their royal use soon extended to Tartary, and the tents of the Khan were bedecked with the most rich and costly furs. In the following century, furs were commonly worn in England until their use was prohibited by Edward III, to all persons whose purse would not warrant a yearly expenditure of £100. The early fur trade of Western Europe was conducted through the merchants on the south coast of the Baltic, who received goods from the ports of Livonia. In the 16th century, a direct trade was opened between the English and Russians, and a company of the former, protected by the Chu, established trading posts on the White Sea, and a warehouse at Moscow, whence they sent trading parties to Persia and the countries on the Caspian Sea. The Chu sent rich presents of beautiful furs to Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, but the latter prohibited the wearing of any but native furs, and the trade soon declined and was abandoned. In the 17th century, Siberia was conquered by the Russians, and its tribute was paid in furs. Large quantities were also furnished to China, but the choicest kinds, the precious ermine, the brilliant, fiery foxes, and the best sables, were taken to Moscow, for the use of the princes and nobles of Russia, Turkey, and Persia. In our own country, the early settlers of the northern provinces soon learned the value of the furs of the numerous animals which peopled the extensive rivers, lakes, and forests of these vast territories. They collected the skins in abundance, and found an increasing demand for them, with every new arrival of immigrants from the mother country. Trinkets, liquors, and other articles sought for by the native tribes, were shipped to Quebec, and from thence up the St. Lawrence to Montreal, which soon became the great trading post of the country. The various tribes of Indians were stimulated by trifling compensation to pursue their only congenial and peaceful occupation, and the French settlers, readily assimilating to the Indian habits, became themselves expert hunters, trappers, and explorers. The business prospered, and the English soon became interested and secured a share of the valuable trade. Many wealthy and influential parties, connected with the government of Great Britain, Prince Rupert and Lord Ashley, among the number, became deeply interested in this source of revenue, and after a successful enterprise, they obtained from Charles II a charter of incorporation, giving to them full possession of the territory within the entrance of Hudson's Straits, not already granted to other subjects, or possessed by those of any other Christian prince or state. In this charter was included the monopoly of all trade in these regions, and thus we see the origin of the great Hudson's Bay Company, which is today one of the largest organizations of its kind on the globe. The territory they claimed extended from Hudson's Bay, west to the Pacific, and north to the Arctic Ocean, excepting that occupied by the French and Russians. They soon formed settlements upon the various rivers which empty into Hudson's Bay, and carried on their operations with immense vigor and success. They met with much opposition and open hostility from the French, and were subjected to vast expenses and losses, but in spite of all, they continued to prosper. Their forts or factories were extended further into the interior of British America, and their power was supreme throughout the country, and in a great measure over the Indians, whom they employed to collect their skins. In the course of time, the French Canadians organized themselves into a united band, under the name of the Northwest Company, and established their headquarters at Montreal. Their operations were carried on with great energy and profit, and many factories were built in the western portion of the province. The company thus soon became a formidable competitor with the Hudson's Bay Company, and for a period of 2 years, an actual state of war existed between them. This condition of affairs finally terminated in a consolidation of the two organizations, under the name of the Hudson's Bay Company, the privileges of which extended over all the territory formerly occupied by both. Thus, we have the history of the famous Hudson's Bay Company, from its origin to its perfect organization. It is a most stupendous concern, and its annual shipment of furs is something amazing. Their great sales take place in the month of March, in order to be completed before Easter, and again in September, every year at London, and are attended by purchasers from nearly all parts of the world. Leipzig, the famous fur mart of Germany, is also the scene of a great annual fair, for the sale of skins. The importance of the fur trade in this country led to the early settlement of the western territories of the United States, and many a frontier city, like St. Paul, has been built up by the enterprise of the trapper. Mackinac and Montreal owe much of their growth to the traffic of the fur trade, and many a kingly fortune, John Jacob Astor's, for instance, has been founded on peltry. Besides the above fur sales in London, a moderate portion of those annually collected in the United States are retained for use, amounting to about 150,000 mink and 750,000 muskrat skins, besides a number of other furs which are manufactured and worn. The annual yield of raw furs throughout the whole world is estimated at over $20 million in value, and when we include the manufactured articles therefrom, the amount will swell to 100 million or over. This will serve to give some idea of the immensity and value of the business. American dealers divide our native furs into two classes, viz., home and shipping furs, the former being chiefly utilized in our own country, while the latter are exported to all parts of the world. New York City is the great fur mart and depot for the shipping trade in this country, and the annual value of its exports, in this one branch of trade, is enormous. The principal shipping furs are the silver, red and cross fox, wildcat, raccoon, fisher, muskrat and skunk. Among the home furs are the marten, mink, opossum, wolf and muskrat, the latter being extensively used both here and abroad. In the following chapter will be found more detailed notes on the leading American furs, including their various uses and the different countries for which they are the especial staples. In order to give the reader some idea of the variety and magnitude of the yield of furs from our own country, we annex a table, p. 282, showing the sales of the Hudson's Bay Company, at London, in the year 1873. Market value of fur skins. Below will be found an authentic table of the comparative values of the various American furs at the present date of publication. The quotations are those of one of our largest fur dealers, as published in the Hat, Cap and Fur Trade Review, the leading journal of the trade in America. Of course, these values are constantly varying, keeping pace with the eccentricities of fashion and the demands of the fur trade, but the table will serve at least to gauge the relative values, as between the two extremes of common and scarce furs. The fur market is a great deal like the stock market. It is constantly fluctuating, and a fur which is today among the novelties, may next year find itself on the low-priced list. The demand for furs of any kind is nearly always governed by fashion, and of course the value is estimated on the demand. If the convention of fur dealers should decide to usher in muskrat fur as the leading and most fashionable article in that line, the fashion would create the demand. The demand would be in turn supplied by the trappers throughout the country, and in proportion as the muskrat skins became scarce, so their value would increase. In this way a skin which may be worth 50 cents at one time may soon acquire a value of 20 times that amount. The comparative value of skins is, therefore, constantly varying more or less, but the annexed table, page 283, will be found useful for general reference, and for approximate figures, will probably answer every purpose for some time to come. Kinds. No of skins. March sale. No of skins. September sale. Total no. Price according to quality. Estimated average price per skin. Pound SD Badger 2700 2701S 27S 106 Bear 5217 2794 8011 5S 28 pounds 10S 5000 Beaver 111,993 37,052 149,045 4S 3D to 38S 6D10000 Fisher 2843 779 3622 8S 23 pounds 5S 2100 Fox, Blue 1990 18S 24 pounds 2100 Cross 1818 471 2289 5S 24 pounds 1100 Kit 6936 932S 8D to 28S 10D300 Red 6914 1383 8297 4S 6D to 17S 1000 Silver 540 148 688 3 pounds 10S to 21 pounds 10,000 White 7312 7312 2S to 14S 9D700 Lynx 2468 1652 4129S 6D to 1 pound 14S 1800 Martin 47,878 18,955 66,833 10S to 3 pounds 19S 11000 Mink 31802 12896 44698 4s to £1 8s 6D 1500 Muscat 651,498 116,488 767,896 3D to 16D 008 Otter 8571 2681 11252 14s to £3 18s 21000 C 9898 £4 10s to £32 15,000 Rabbit 10,029 10,029 3D to 4D 003 Raccoon 3,582 3,582 1s to 3s 3D26 Skunk 1691 1691 2s to 7s 400 Wolf 6216 188 6404 6s to £2 15s 1500 Wolverine 1770 322,098s to £1 1s 1500 American Fur Skins, Table of Values * prime seconds thirds fourths Badger $1.50 10 cents Bear, Black 18.009.001.00 Cub 10.005.001.00 Brown 7.004.001.00 Beaver, California per pound 1.2575 Southern 1.007540 Upper Missouri 1.75 1.50 50 Lake Super and Canada 2.50 1.75 75 Cat, Wild 40 10 House 15 10 Deer, Florida per pound 20 Missouri 20 Elk and Moose per pound 35.25 Fisher, Southern 7.005.001.00 Eastern and Canada 10.008.002.00 Fox, Silver 100.025.001.00 Cross 3.001.501.00 Blue 15.005.001.00 White 3.001.50 Red 1.75 1.0075 25 Gray 3.001.50 50 25 Kit 50 25 Lynx, Minnesota 2.50 1.00 Canada 4.00 2.00 Martin, dark 10.006.002.00, small pale 2.001.00, mink, southern 1.0050, 2510, western 1.25, 1.0050, 10, middle states 2.00, 1.25, 50, 10, Minnesota 2.50, 1.50, 75, 20, New England 3.50, 1.75, 1.00, 20, Quebec and Halifax 4.00, 2.00, 1.00, 20, Muskrat, southern 28, 25, 15, 5, western 30, 28, 18, 6, northern 32, 30, 28, eastern 35, 30, 22, 10, Opossum, Ohio 30, 20, 10, southern 20, 10, Otter, southern 5.00, 3.00, 2.00, 50, northern 10.00, 6.00, 2.00, 50, rabbit 3, raccoon, southern 50, 30, 15, 5, western 1.00, 50, 25, Michigan 1.25, 80, 35, seal, hare 60, fur 10.00, skunk, black cased 1.00, 60, 40, 10, half stripe 60, 50, 25, 10, white 20, 10, wolf, timber 3.00, 1.50, prairie 1.00, 75, wolverine 5.00, 2.00, asterisk from the Hat Cap and Fur Trade Review. Notwithstanding all these advertised prices, the young trapper often experiences great difficulty in a profitable disposal of his furs. Like every other business, the fur trade runs in its regular grooves, and the average furrier will often pay an experienced professional $5 for a skin for which he would not offer $1 to an amateur. This certainly seems discouraging, but the knowledge of the fact is calculated to prevent greater discouragement. We often see fancy prices advertised by fur dealers for first-class skins, but when the furs are sent, only a few are selected as prime, the rest being rejected as worthless, or perhaps meeting with a meager offer far below the regular rates. In this way the dealers have the opportunity of choice selection without incurring any risk. Many a young trapper has been thus disappointed, and has seen his small anticipated fortune dwindle down to very small proportions. The fur trade is supplied through regular professional channels, and in giving our advice to the novice, we would recommend as the most satisfactory and profitable plan that he should make his sales to some local hunter or trapper, who has had experience with the fur trade, and who is satisfied to pay a fair price for the various skins with the probability of selling at an advance, and thus realizing a profit. In nearly every trapping locality such men are to be found, and although the prices earned may be below the market rates, the amateur takes none of the speculative risks of the business, and should be willing to take lower prices on this account. American fur skins, their uses at home and abroad. In the early history of fur apparel, its use was determined by climate. Today, and especially in this country, it is regulated by the caprice of fashion. The mink for many years took the lead in the list of fashionable furs, but has of late been superseded by the introduction of the fur seal. The most choice and costly of our American furs at the present day is the silver fox. When highly dressed they are worth from 10 to 50 guineas each in the European market. They are principally bought by the Russians and Chinese. The skins of the red fox are purchased by the Chinese, Greeks, Persians, and other Oriental nations. They are made into linings for robes, etc., and ornamented with the black fur of the paws which is set on in spots or waves. The fur of the beaver was formerly highly prized in the manufacture of hats, and yielded a large portion of the profits of the fur companies, constituting the largest item in value among furs. Cheaper materials have since been substituted in making hats, and the demand for this purpose has been greatly reduced. By a new process the skin is now prepared as a handsome fur for collars and gauntlets, and its fine silky wool has been successfully woven. The soft, white fur from the belly of the animal is largely used in France for bonnets. Raccoon skins are the great staple for Russia and Germany, where, on account of their durability and cheapness, they are in demand for linings for coats, etc. Among the bear skins, those of the black and grizzly are extensively used for military caps, housings, holsters, sleigh robes, etc. The fur of the lynx is soft, warm and light, and is commonly dyed of a beautiful shining black. It is used for the facings and linings of cloaks, chiefly in America. The fisher yields a dark and full fur which is largely used in fashionable winter apparel. The skin of the marten is richly dyed and utilized in choice furs and trimmings. The mink, like the two foregoing, belongs to the same genus as the Russian sable, and its fur so much resembles the latter as to be sometimes mistaken for it. It is one of fashion's furs, and the hair of the tail is sometimes used in the manufacture of artists' pencils. The muskrat produces the fur most worn by the masses, and is largely exported into Germany, France and England. It is estimated that over 6 millions of muskrat skins are annually taken in America, and of that number 1/2 are used in Germany alone. The skin of the otter is at present classed among the leading fashionable furs in this country. They are dyed of a deep purplish black color, and are made into sacks, muffs, etc. It is also used by the Russians, Greeks and Chinese. It is mostly an American product, but is also procured to some extent in the British Isles from a smaller variety of the species. The skins of the wolf are chiefly used for sleigh robes and such purposes. The fur of the rabbit is mainly employed in the manufacture of felt, and is also utilized for lining and trimming. The business of breeding rabbits for their fur has been introduced into the United States, and large numbers have been successfully raised in Danbury, Conn, for felting purposes connected with the manufacture of hats. The fur of the wolverine or glutton finds a market for the most part in Germany, where it is used for trimmings and cloak linings. The skunk furnishes the fur known as Alaska sable, which forms one of our staple pelts, many thousands being annually exported to Poland and the adjacent provinces. The badger yields a valuable and fashionable fur, which is also extensively used in the manufacture of artists' brushes, a good badger blender forming a valuable accessory to a painter's outfit. Shaving brushes by the thousand are annually made from the variegated hair of the badger. The opossum yields a fur in very common use among the masses, and the skins of the domestic cat are utilized to a considerable extent in the manufacture of robes, mats, etc. The fur of the puma and wildcat are also employed in this form, and may often be seen handsomely mounted and hanging on the backs of sleighs on our fashionable thoroughfares. Among the small game the skins of squirrels are used for linings, and the soft, velvety fur of the mole is manufactured into light robes, and very fine hats, and in theatrical paraphernalia is sometimes employed for artificial eyebrows. Full descriptions of the color of the various furs will be found in our lengthy illustrated chapter on our American animals. The End. Index. Adirondack Experiences with Mosquitoes, 256. Advice to the Novice on the Sale of Furs, 283. Airtight Jar, for Butter, and c. 236. Alaska Sable, 286. See also Skunk. Alcohol, its use and abuse, 257. Alum, used in waterproofing, 249. Amateur trapping, 225. Amber, olive, used in the art of trapping, 152. American fur skins. Table of values, 284. Their uses at home and abroad, 284. American lion. See Puma. Amputation, self-inflicted, as a means of escape with captured animals, 144. To prevent, 144, 145. Ancient uses of furs, 278. Anise, oil of. Its use in the art of trapping, 152. As bait for fish, 240. Annual yield of furs throughout the world, 281. Apparatus for stretching skins, 273. Arrow,